So here we are. It's the end of the month, and of course, it is time for Steve and Krys Crimmy. And Jasper is here today with me to help mediate and be a part of the experience. How are you guys?
Yeah, well,
We're
thanks.
doing okay, Robert. Nice, happy spring to you and to Jasper.
Yeah, so a lot of people don't know, but it's going to be Mr. Crimmy's birthday coming up real soon, Gemini.
Yeah, apparently I'm hitting. Apparently, it's interesting because all our friends are older than me. I'm the last of our friends here who are, not really young to hit 60. So
Right.
I'm kind of like the kid, which is bizarre in a lot of ways. But
Well, in the spirit of Hermes, you've got a little story that you want to share with us and how it might be fairly resonant for the times that we're living in. And it's the hymn to Demeter, and it has to do with ancient mysteries and initiations and things that we used to be a part of and part of our lives that we've been stripped of. And I want you to give people some background and some insight into that part of our culture and history that's been kind of washed away. And then let's drop into this hymn to Demeter thing.
yeah, thanks, Robert. I appreciate the opportunity. It's a nice birthday gift for me to go on about my favorite topics. We've been talking a lot about sort of the unsavory side of things that have been going on, and certainly certainly during the Greek days that was not an unusual occurrence. Things unsavory happened all over the place. But one of the things at least I wanted to bring out was that at the heart and at the beginning of Western civilization, which everyone, for us, it's ancient Greece, the heart of our civilization. You can certainly go back to Babylon and Egypt, etc. But the configuration of who we are comes out of the Greco-Roman world. Certainly all our laws are Roman, our structures, and you can find, if you go to Washington, D.C., of course, you've got a famous statue of Washington sitting on a throne, and the Greek columns are everywhere. So obviously the Masons and whoever else who formed that city were very much informed by Greece, and I think they saw it in a lot of ways as a new Athens or a new Rome. I think that makes a lot of sense. But at the most central mysteries of the Greek world were called the Eleusinian mysteries, and they're relatively famous, mainly because they took place over a period of it's unknown when they began, but it's probably around 1,000. It could be 1,500 years that it went on. So Eleusis is a town just outside of Athens, and part of the mysteries involved a procession from Athens to Eleusis. I think that happened later after Athens took over Eleusis, but there was a myth about Demeter and Persephone that is kind of central to a lot of things, especially the relationship between males and females and gods and humans. So this mystery school took place. It was completely secret. No one knows what happened in this sort of room inside this other room. There's a big room called the Telestron, which held up to 3,000 people. And then there was this sort of a small room where the Hierophant, who was the head priest, there were priests and priestess of this mystery, of the Eleusinian mysteries, and something was revealed at the core of this mystery. And this something, the people who went through it, no one during the whole time ever said what it was, but what it did was it gave them, one said, happiness in this world and confidence and happiness for the next world. In other words, something was shown to them that made them understand that the afterlife was a real and good thing for initiates. So they saw something there, and it's been speculation whether it was a revelation of the goddess Persephone herself. Other speculation has been that a sheath of wheat was made to grow magically in front of the initiates. But I would think for something to last that long and to be that effective, it had to be a really potent and ineffable experience. It had to be something that would be incredibly difficult to describe. So it had to be a vision at the end of it. And whether or not it was Persephone herself who appeared at the end of it, that's up to speculation, but it's something really powerful had to happen then. So there's the myth that that the ritual itself, the whole mystery progression, aligns itself with, and I don't want to get into details about the initiation itself, except to say that this was really at the heart of really Western culture. I mean, and it was men and women. Slaves were allowed to be initiated. There's one famous story of somebody who wanted to buy a gift for his slave girlfriend, but the owner would take anything that he gave her. So the gift he gave her was the initiation, which I think, so there was a payment you had to make. I think it was something like 30 drachmas, which I don't know what that translates into now. And a hog was offered to Demeter.
A hog.
A hog was offered to Demeter. We can just let that sit there. So that's like a really loose background to the mysteries themselves. They took place there was a lesser mysteries that took place in spring, and then the greater mysteries, the big revelation, took place in the fall. There was purification, there was fasting, and then there was this taking of this drink after this 9-day fast called Kykeon. And Kykeon, Gordon Wasson thinks it's mushrooms, but so he thinks everything is mushrooms basically. And it may have been, but there's nothing written anywhere about it having to do with mushrooms. In the hymn itself, Demeter gives instructions to somebody, and it's a barley drink mixed with a mint that some people think is pennyroyal. Oh. And under certain conditions, yes. Yeah. And of course, then there's, though it's not really from Greece, it's more South American, though who knows what was growing back at that time. There was, of course, Salvia divinorum, which is an incredibly potent psychoactive mint. I've only played with that once, and it was a wholly different critter than anything else that I've ever encountered.
Yeah, I've heard people's experiences around it, and really, really fascinating, and almost in some ways DMT-like.
Meeting goddess,
yeah,
plant and what have you.
Yeah, I had just very briefly. Yeah, I went into this like complete, absolute, sort of brownish, blackish nether space. Of just completely unmanifest. There was nothing inside of me, nothing outside of me, and my whole left side was blank. There was nothing to the left of me. It was like a really bizarre experience.
I've heard stories of people when they do salvia, it's like they have this experience of being in these frames of reality, and the frames collapse and get lower and lower and lower. Mm-hmm. You're almost like a two-dimensional form in some ways. I've heard that. It's a very unusual experience, right?
Yeah. I just felt into deep nothingness.
I've heard of some people meeting the goddess or the plant, the feminine aspect of the plant. Mm-hmm. Very powerful, though.
Well, I would think that's probably very plausible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're talking about people who've had very profound mushroom experiences, and they feel as though they're in touch with this intelligence.
Absolutely.
That is being transmitted through the spores. And I know from my experience with ibogaine, one of the keys to one of the things that really came through was the plant itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I totally get that. And I think that's real plausible. So do you think that they were using some form of salvia? I mean, is that like indigenous in that area or just speculation?
It's not. It's more Salvia divinorum is from South America,
But
I
there
believe.
must be mint.
But there are other mints, and there's pennyroyal has some psychoactive qualities, and also it's just not, like, people hanging around taking the stuff, right? You've made this progression. You've been chanting and singing for days. You've fasted for 9 days.
Yeah.
So a certain structure is made around you.
Yeah. And the other thing too, which I think is maybe worth just noting, is that all our senses in this time and in this form of reality become really diluted.
And
dull, right?
Very dull.
So who knows what drinking pennyroyal would have been like, 2,000 years ago or 2,500 years ago.
Everything was different. And the food was alive.
Yeah. I mean, it could have been just a completely different trip. So.
Yes. And at the beginning of this time, and like you said, the plant had a spirit, and for the Greeks, of course, Demeter is the grain mother. So there's a complete connection between Demeter and the grain, just like there are corn goddesses in North America and things like that are unified in many respects. Okay, so I guess I'll start. Maybe I'll start traditionally. I'd like to just when you tell a tale, you always invoke the muses, and the muses are the daughters of memory, and either Apollo or Zeus, depending on the story. So I asked that the daughters of memory help me remember this tale, and especially call on Talia, who is the muse of comedy, and she adopted me when I was in college, and she has never failed me throughout my whole life as far as whenever I've needed inspiration in writing or anything like that. So I've never. Or quip, yeah. She's the muse of comedy, and of course, comedy in ancient Greece was not, all in the family. So actually, that might even be a closer example. But it was in the end, things were knitted back together. Tragedy, of course, things fall apart at the end. There's the death of the main character, and usually a bunch of others. Usually, comedies end in marriage. Some sort of sacred marriage, so things are coming together and order is restored at the end. So somehow she came to me early on, and so I've never actually acknowledged her publicly, so that feels kind of nice.
Yo, shout out to Talia.
Talia, Thalia, Talia. So the hymn is written in what's called dactylic hexameter, and that's all of the epics. The Iliad, the Odyssey are written in that particular meter, and it's too short and a long, too short and a long, too short and a long, too short syllables, too short long syllables. Not very few. The English doesn't lend itself to it. English lends itself to the Shakespearean lines, which is iambic pentameter. Thank you. All right, so a line that fits perfectly the way things are going these days is the first lines that Macbeth utters. So fair and foul a day I have not seen. So fair and foul a day I have not seen. So it's one short, one long, and it's evocative of the human heartbeat.
So fair and foul a day
I have not seen.
I have not seen. What's really interesting is that you and I were riffing, I think, on chat 2 days ago, and you made this really interesting distinction of everything is permitted, but then we have like the thought police at the same time. And it kind of falls into that fair and foul kind of territory,
Right. That's why I brought it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we were talking about, like, in your show earlier today, you were talking about the under the Shah of Iran, you had the Savak, brutal CIA-controlled police force, And at the same time, the education system was tremendous there, and you could study mysticism, and the Sufi schools flourished. I'm sure they're allowed to flourish within their context of mystical gatherings, things like that, and their own initiations.
I also think of the Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Same kind of thing. And you can certainly say that. It's very easy to see.
So, but you hear more of this dactylic hexameter in music. Most music lines are two shorts long, and then they'll do. So, for example, the line of our favorite songwriter, David Sylvian, for his song Orpheus, since that fits in. Standing firm on the stony ground, the wind blows hard, moves these clothes around, right? Standing firm on this stony ground, the wind blows hard, moves these clothes around. So you have a combination of two shorts and a long, and then a short and a long.
Interesting.
Right. So that's how you develop these. So the whole thing of songwriting is developing these combinations of these kind of building blocks, and that develops your rhythm, and then you follow that rhythm over and over again, line to line.
Okay, I'm going to shut up. I'm going to let you get into your flow.
So
here we go.
So anyway, so that's the rhythm of this poem, and just to say that everything was written. If you were writing a book on history, you would write it in this kind of, you write it in verse. If you're writing a book on philosophy, you're writing a book on medicine, you would write it in verse. Okay, it wasn't until later when you get Plato and Aristotle hated the fact that the early philosophers wrote in verse. And he's like, why can't you just spit it out, right? So even by the time of Plato and Aristotle, poetry has become degraded.
But isn't that a mnemonic device, the poetry?
Well, when the tales were told, they were improvised in verse. Okay, and oh gosh, can I tell a quick side story too?
Yeah, sure.
If you don't mind. In 1983, I was with my friend Peter Raymond. We backpacked through Turkey. 2 years later, Krys and I spent our first date backpacking through Turkey. But 2 years earlier, it was on the eve of the Kurdish rebellion, and we were way out in eastern Turkey, in Kurdish lands, and in Kars, which you might remember is the town that Gurdjieff comes from. And Kars is like this. At the time, it was like a Wild West town. There's tumbleweeds going. It was the dusty biblical plains, and it was just an astonishing place to be. And we found a tea house, and there was this really tall, well-dressed gentleman there, Kurdish guy, and he was like about 6'1", was like really tall for somebody out there. I'm 5'10", and I towered over everybody out in Turkey. And one thing you knew about the Kurds is like you were their best friend or mortal enemy right off the bat. So we met this guy whose name I forget at the time, and he says, why don't you come back later tonight? I'm playing. And I said, oh, great. And he just had a picture of him in a poster with playing his saz, which is a long neck lute. And a couple of years later, I saw this. I remember Michael Wood did all these BBC videos. And so one of them was called In the Footsteps of Alexander, where he just traveled Alexander's route. And when he got to this place, Kars, in eastern Turkey, he found these, what they call them ashaks. Gurdjieff called them ashaks. That's a traditional name of these bards who would improvise on various themes, either on traditional themes, on mythical themes, tales of Gilgamesh, things like that. Now, we were there at the last time that they were allowed to improvise freely in eastern Turkey, in this town of Kars. So so Peter and I, obviously, the only thing even resembling Americans for, hundreds of miles around at that time, and just not a common sight. So obviously we were kind of oddities. So we show up that night, and so to witness this tradition that goes back to Homer of improvising these tales. and this guy in this tea house. And you got to figure this room, 100 people packed in, smoke, you can hardly see anything. And they had two opening acts who were, our Turkish was really poor. So you just be able to pick up words. They'd be pointing to the picture. It was just before they had elections. The general was still, Erdogan was still running the country at the time. So then this guy, the guy that we met, comes on, and he's obviously a master player. He's just doing these intricate melodies, and he's just obviously a cut above everyone else. And so he's singing, so Peter and I are there, and people are throwing, money into the neck of his saws, and, smoke everywhere, and we're just kind of like packed in with everyone else. And he sings a verse, and all of a sudden, everyone in the place turns and looks at us. And we're just like, holy shit, this is like a place you could just disappear from. Everyone's just looking really intently on us. And he does this little instrumental, and then he does the next verse. And the only word I picked up was the word dost, which is a word for friend in Turkish. And he sings that verse. Everybody cracks up laughing. They're slapping us on the back. We're everybody's best friend. And so I said, I don't know what we dodged, but it was pretty intense. So that's my my actual encounter with an Ashok, the people who sang these hymns back in the day.
Interesting. Wow. That's like one of those situations where you just kind of pinch yourself and the person you're with, like, can you believe we're here? Can you believe we're here?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's like being alive right there.
Yeah.
So that's a cool story. Thanks for sharing that, Steve.
Yeah. And I got dozens. Peter and I had some adventures in Eastern Turkey, and he's driving down from DC to come to my birthday party. I'm really happy. That's nice. He and his wife, Karen. So anyway, so that's the tradition. Okay, of course, we're proceeding by infinite digression here. I apologize. So this tale goes back to maybe 700 BC. So it begins with Persephone, who is also called Kore, the maiden, the virgin. Persephone is the daughter of Demeter. Demeter is the grain goddess. Demeter, Meter, means D is kind of like Ga, the original name of the Earth Mother, like Gaia. Ge became Gaia. So Demeter could be. It's some people speculate. At least it could be the Earth Mother. She's connected with Kybele and all the other, Earth Mother goddesses around. Persephone is hanging out with the nymphs and other goddesses in this field. And the field in sort of Greek lore is sort of this liminal place. And the actual Gaia, the Earth Mother, causes a 100-headed Narcissus to come up through the ground. And Persephone is enraptured with it. Right? She goes to smell and pick up the smell. The smell, it says, goes from heaven to earth. As she's picking it up, the ground splits open, and up from the ground on his chariot with divine horses comes Hades. Hades abducts Persephone. It's sometimes called the rape of Persephone, but there's in this version of the story, there is no rape. It's an abduction, but the word could have both meanings. He swoops her up into the chariot. It goes around for a while and then goes back into the underworld. Now, back in those days, there was this sort of division. Zeus ran heaven. Poseidon ran the oceans. Poseidon, Neptune. And Hades, the underworld. And the earth was kind of a place where the gods could sort of play out their stuff.
Right.
So she screams from the abduction, and nobody hears it. as it turns out, is an arrangement between Zeus. So Zeus's brother is Hades. So Zeus is giving Persephone as a gift to his brother, as a wife. But he didn't tell the mother, didn't tell Demeter. So she screams, and none of the gods or people hear it or see it, except for Hecate and Helios, which is the sun deity. So Demeter only hears the echo of it. And so she goes, running to try to find out what happened to her daughter. Now, to get into a little bit of the backstory, which is kind of interesting to me, because Gaia has always considered this wonderful, wonderful, happy Earth Mother. We do the happy dances for Gaia. Gaia is really a troublemaker. And all the three, at one point we talked about the original, when we talked about Saturn, right? We talked about the three original sets of deities in Greece. So the first one was Uranos and Gaia, heaven and earth. Uranos is Uranus. All right, so Gaia is the first couple. Now what happens is, so their children, Kronos, Saturn, and Rhea, that's the next sort of set of them. But Gaia is the one who convinces Kronos to castrate his father, her husband. So she's behind the first shift in gods, where Kronos, Saturn takes over. She's also then the one who saves Zeus, because Kronos gets the prediction that one of his children is going to usurp him. So he swallows all of his children. Gaia tells Rhea, just give him this stone, we'll wrap it up in swaddling clothes, he won't know the difference. He's an idiot. So Kronos eats the stone, thinks that Zeus grows up elsewhere, and Zeus eventually lives to overthrow Kronos. So Gaia is behind that. Now Gaia is behind this sort of this capture of Persephone. I don't know quite what to make of it, but it's just an interesting aspect to her that's not really ever talked about much. So Persephone is down in the underworld. Demeter is beside herself. She is in grieving for the loss of her daughter, and she goes for a 9 days without eating anything. Which in the mysteries you go for 9 days fast also. So she meets up with Hecate, says, I heard what happened, but I didn't see it, so I don't know where she is. But let's go to Helios, because the sun sees everything. They go to Helios, and Helios is kind of like hemming and hawing. He's saying, well, yeah, I did see it, and it was Hades that took her. But he he's not he wouldn't be a bad husband. He's like second in command to Zeus. It's probably it's a good match. So he's sitting there trying to convince Demeter that it's a good match, and she's like screw you. So she goes wandering around the earth, trying to figure out exactly what happened, because there was only Hermes could make the journey to the underworld. Right? The gods were up in Olympus, and so there was no way for them to get to the underworld, even for the gods. So Demeter goes wandering around, and she ends up in Eleusis, the town where these mysteries take place eventually. She's at Eleusis, and she goes into the human world, disguises herself as a human, as an old woman. She wears black clothes, she has a veil on. She goes to the well at Eleusis and just sits there. So the king of Eleusis, whose name escapes me at the moment, Helios. So I have to check a couple notes. Helios is the prince among the princes of Eleusis. And Helios has 4 daughters. The 4 daughters go to the well, and they see Demeter there, and they say, really, you're this mother, this woman. Why are you there? You really shouldn't be sitting here by yourself. And interestingly enough, Demeter concocts this story saying that she was from Crete, which some people say that the goddess Demeter is actually from Crete. She's from Crete, and she was abducted by pirates, and they were kind of, they were having a meal somewhere, and I didn't want to partake of the meal, so I ran off and escaped them. So, interesting enough, she tells a story that mirrors the abduction of her daughter, saying that she and for some reason it's specific that they're men pirates that she escapes them. I don't know that they're women pirates, but other than in the Jolly Roger days, I think there was a famous woman pirate. I can't remember her name. Black Betty, is that her name? I think something like that. Anyway.
Yeah, sounds about right.
So so she's at the well. The well, of course, this is another liminal place, right? Because you have the Celtic bardic traditions. You would go to the well for your for your inspiration, especially, or sometimes the magic trout would come from.
Right. It's a really important hexagram in the I Ching as well.
The well, yes.
Oh, yeah. The sacred salmon.
Yeah. Yeah, I always liked when I got the well. That was always a good one to get.
Except when one of the moving lines was broken well, muddy water.
Yeah.
Like that, right? So. So she's hanging out at the well.
So she's at the well. So the daughters come and they say, so Demeter says, look, I can be a nursemaid. I know magic spells. I'm pretty, well. And they're looking at her, and even though she's disguised herself, there's obviously, if she's a goddess, there's something that's going to be poking through the clothes.
Right.
So they say, look, if not our home, there's somebody's going to take you in. You can't be out here by yourself. So they go back to their mother. Mother says, go bring her to our place. Now there are 4, daughters, and then there was a young son, which apparently much younger and very recently born, called Domophon. And so Demeter comes in, and it's interesting. So as she steps across the threshold of the house, a bright light fills the place. So again, this other liminal place going from the outside to the inside. So this other liminal place comes in, and she can't help herself. She sort of expresses that as a goddess very briefly, and it's not enough that they kind of get stunned. They don't really grok that she's a goddess, but they know that someone special is here. So. Their mother, Metanera, has asked her to sit on a stool, or she gives up her seat for her, and Demeter refuses it. But they have a servant who seems to get what's going on. It's called Iambe, or Iambe, and Iambe is the same word that iambic pentameter comes from.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So Iambe, and then because in Greece, you would use, for classical poetry, you'd use the dactylic hexameter, but you would use iamb for what would be called rustic poetry, sort of like low-level stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So she knows enough to get a stool for Demeter and puts woolen cloth over it, which no one really explains. Wool is associated a lot with mysticism. The Sufis, the word suf apparently means wool, or some people think it does.
And it is one of those fabrics that will absorb energy.
Yes, true. So, so she sits on the stool. Metanera offers her some wine, which she refuses. So the wine, of course, is associated with Dionysus. Dionysus is associated with Hades. Heraclitus said Dionysus and Hades are the same, famously. So she's like, no, I don't want to be part of this sort of male mystery drink. And she says, make me this kykeon, this barley tea with this pennyroyal mint. So they make that for her. After these this is the way you have the guest host relationships. You establish, you feed, then you talk about whatever you're going to talk about. So she says, so Metanera says, I have a young son. I've been waiting. The gods gave us this young son. Could you please be nursemaid for him? And so she says, yes, I'll take care of your son. So what happens is, though, Domophon is the son. So, of course, she's not giving her regular breast milk. Of course, her breast milk is ambrosia, which is the food of the gods. So the child is like growing amazingly and turning into very, very much a god. Every night, Demeter was dipping him in the fire. So, in a sense, maybe purifying him of his mortality. So Demeter, all this time, is making a deity out of the sun.
So she's created a super soldier.
In very much, almost exactly. Because what happens is Metanera looks, in the middle of the night, she goes and then she catches Demeter dipping her son in the fire, and of course she freaks out. It's like, wow, what's going on? What's going on? And so Demeter drops the kid and says, oh, you mortals are so foolish. I was about to make him immortal, and now I can't, because she spied in on the mysteries. So now I can't do it. He'll be a hero. He'll be a great warrior, but he's not going to quite be immortal. So, so then the daughters come. They kind of pick up the kid, and then Demeter reveals herself as Demeter, as the full goddess, and walks out the door. Before that, she says, tell the men in Eleusis, I want a temple, build it, tell you exactly where to build it, and this is how you propitiate me. So the girls spend the whole night doing like cleansing rituals and things like that. In the morning, they tell the men, tell the father. Father gets all the princes together. They build a temple, and Demeter sits in it. So she's just sitting in the temple. Still, so she's gone. It's kind of an odd thing. It's almost like she was trying to replace the loss of Persephone with the addition of this son, Domophon, or somehow, because there's no discussion of why she's doing it in the poem. So she just sits in their temple, and what she decides is that nothing is going to grow anymore until I see Persephone. And she just sits in the temple, and that's it. So the gods, one by one, come down. Oh, come on back to Olympus. We'll buy you. You can have all kinds of honors, and things like that. And they come down one by one. She's like, nope, I'm just sitting here. So what happens is that nothing grows. And when nothing grows, and besides the fact that the people obviously suffer, there are no offerings to the gods because they have nothing to offer. Now the gods start to take notice, because if they're not getting any offerings, they're not getting fed. They're not getting fed, and they're getting forgotten. And the one thing that a deity or anybody wants is attention. It's the greatest gift you can give anyone is your attention. One of the greatest gifts. So they start freaking out up in Olympus because no one's giving them offerings because there's nothing growing. Right. They called it first fruits. If you would have like the first things that come, you would offer to the deities. So at this point, Zeus sends Gemini, Hermes, down to the underworld to tell him to bring Persephone back because just nothing's working anymore. And Hades says, sure. And then he slips Persephone a pomegranate seed before she goes. And it's interesting because in this telling by the poet, he tricks her into taking it. Later, when Persephone tells the story, she says it was forced on her. It's kind of interesting that Persephone's story, what happened, is different in some subtle ways than the poet story. So Persephone takes the pomegranate. What happens after that? Hermes gets he gets to use the Hades Uber, his chariot, and gets to ride back up with Persephone. Takes Persephone to the mother. They have a wonderful reunion, and because Demeter says, "You didn't eat anything while you're down there, did you?" Mm-hmm. And she says, "Well, he kind of forced this little pomegranate seed on me." And she's like, okay. Well, now you're going to have to spend a third of the year in the underworld and 2/3 of the year on top. Other versions have half and half. So a lot of people take this to be just a very simple, this is how we explain the fact that plants come up from the ground and, die back and things like that. And it's just, most commonly myth is read today is just sort of, dumb explanations of science. So, so she says, okay, anyway, they have a great reunion, and then basically what happens after that, they go back up to Olympus. But he says, before I go to Olympus, I'm going to teach the mysteries to the people of Eleusis, and from then on, the mysteries are centered there, and the mysteries again have, they kind of recapitulate the experience of Demeter. So she goes back up to Olympus. And Persephone, from that point on, she goes from being the maiden to being queen of the dead and the living. Persephone is kind of a minor player in this, but really, in the end, she becomes the connector between the underworld, the middle world, and heaven.
Interesting.
And, so she bridges these worlds. The mysteries bridge the divine and the human world. Okay, so the mysteries, you get a taste of something, of maybe what you get a taste of too from that vision is your own divine essence, mm-hmm. and your own connection with Persephone. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think something like that must happen because, like I said, the outcome of it was always, confidence in where you're going to go, and. Right. It's said that the people who were initiated, who went through the mysteries, they go to the Elysian fields, this sort of special place where the heroes go, and not to sort of the shady, murky part of Hades, apparently.
Right.
The Trump Tower of Hades or something. I don't know. So so that's basically the tale. There's the other interesting. There's a couple of people have interesting takes on it. One of it that. So a lot of people read this as this sort of, the male gods taking over the female gods, but it starts off with it's already happened.
Right.
It seems to me that it's more like the feminine aspect saying, okay, we still got some juice here. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You can't run roughshod over us anymore. We're going to try to start bringing things together, bringing the worlds together, bringing the divine and human together. And so that's the aspect that Demeter and Persephone bring to this.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. You think Persephone enjoyed that third of the year down in Hades? She get to be a bad girl? What do you think?
Well, it's interesting. They always call, she's, the epithet. She's always the dread queen of the underworld. But she was also very healing. The thing is, though, there's never been, there's a number of heroes, Odysseus and Aeneas and Pythagoras, they make the journey to the underworld.
Right.
And Persephone's always home. It's never like, they go knock on the door, oh shoot, she's in Olympus. So it seems to me that there's an earlier version especially coming out of North Africa and Sicily, where Persephone was always the queen of the dead.
Mm-hmm.
And so it could be that the maiden, the daughter of Demeter, got conflated with her in certain ways. Or in another version of the story, Sicily is given to Persephone as a gift, as a marriage gift by Zeus,
Mm-hmm.
Which is my ancestral home, where three of my grandparents were from. So, yeah, well, she's hugely honored. She's hugely powerful. Anybody who goes to the underworld has to face her, you know. And I will say there's one thing that when we used to do this practice of incubation, which we still do on occasion, which is the Greek the Greek meditation of Hezekiah of going into perfect absolute stillness, and in that, you may have the experience of sinking into the underworld. My experience was more realization that the underworld and this world were the same place, that they're layered within each other. And in that, I had one experience where Persephone reached up through the ground with her hand right into my chest and deposited 2 seeds in my chest. And that was the entirety of that experience. I happen to think now that those 2 seeds are 2 books. One I'm working on, one is already out. Mm-hmm. So, but the fact is, so this is why I think that Persephone is real. Mm-hmm. These gods and goddesses are real, but they've lost all their attention. And once the culture does not attend to their foundations and to their divine origins, we have what we've been talking about forever, really, at this point, this flipping of all the sacred symbols, mm-hmm. flipping of the tales. Everything just gets flipped into its dark aspect.
Right. It's inverted.
Sorry?
It's inverted.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Pyramids are evil. Swastikas are evil, obviously. You know.
But isn't that with the whole...
Well, there's the upside down cross as well, right?
The upside down cross, exactly. Yeah. And upside down pentagram. The pentagram was sacred to the Pythagoreans. Why? Because if you take the star and you do the ratio of the side to like the crossing line, mm-hmm. it's exactly the golden mean.
Right.
The golden mean is contained within the pentagram. And the golden mean is how we are constructed. The golden.
Well, it's man, right? You look at the pentagram and it's man, right?
Right. So here's an arm. This is the ratio between here to here, and here at the end of my fingers is a golden mean. From here to here, each of the knuckles, this is a golden mean spiral. Mm-hmm. So, from the navel down to your feet, to the navel up to the top of your head is a golden mean proportion. Mm-hmm. So we're completely designed with that proportion. So if that proportion is the heart of creation, it's also you distort it, and then you can use that. Magic is magic. Mm-hmm.
I was going to say the American Gods, the movie American Gods, and the book by Neil Gaiman was really pointing to that, how mm-hmm. the gods have been forgotten and what happens when they're forgotten, how everything just devolves.
Right. So we can look, if you want, and not particularly you, but I mean, you can look at the fact of what's going on in Hawaii. You can say it's possibly on the spiritual level, an underworld dissatisfaction.
Right. There's a bubbling up.
Coming up from below, and
certainly the feeling that Pele is.
Yeah, Krys, you were looking at earthquakes today, right?
Yeah. What's the guy's name? I can't remember now. Deutsch Sense, something like
Dutch
that.
Sense.
Dutch Sense. Wow, his report from yesterday had this entire cluster of earthquakes starting over in Iran and moving all the way, going west, all the way through Europe.
Right.
All like 4s and 5s on the scale.
Well, when I was doing my show today, and today specifically, this day is when that they were talking about as they were recording this, which is the 22nd of May, was replete with these 3 or 4 all-time earthquakes recorded on this day, like, wiping out 200,000 Chinese.
Right.
Oh, you mean
history Peru.
Oh, really? Huh.
So this is an interesting day, and clearly with Uranus and Taurus, we're going through something pretty significant. I mean,
not hard to see.
To me, it's it really feels like we're in a birth phase. I mean, on the one hand, things feel like they're dying. Like there is the pall of death in the air in a lot of ways, but it also feels like something new is coming.
That's how it works.
And they're commingling, just like what we were saying. It was the best of times and the worst of times, the most fair and the most foul day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what we're experiencing simultaneously. Because we can look around and there are institutions that are dying. Sears just closed 40 stores.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Ford's got to not make any more cars. I mean, the company that made the very first, car.
Oh, is that so?
In terms of its, assembly line, mass production, no more cars. It's the death of something. So we're seeing a lot of these sort of death signs in the air. But at the same time, people are talking about, this being the time of the Great Awakening or another Great Awakening. And I actually believe that. Now, whether or not that's going to be shepherded into another kind of false reality, well, that's a whole other discussion that we can have. But I do believe that people are experiencing what they believe to be an awakening. And I think that it's valid and true. So we have this time where something is in its birthing stage or its birthing phase. And we're seeing the death also of these other kinds of institutions. And when we look at what happens or what's happening in Hawaii with Kilauea, we're seeing both death and life, right, simultaneously.
Right.
When the lava comes up, it's going to basically take out whatever's in its path. But then when it cools, there's this other thing that is coming out of it and being born out of it. So it's a very, very interesting time. And, maybe the Eleusinian mysteries might have something to do with this resolution of duality. I don't know how it works out or how they worked it out, but by being able to hold these two perspectives simultaneously together, I think links us with eternity in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And not a lot of people can do that.
No, but go ahead.
But, since this is a horticultural model, you can just see that everything comes out of death. You have to have death in order to have life. They're not separate at all. They're inextricably intertwined. So the compost pile is the most fertile place on your land. And all the life comes bursting out of the compost.
Yeah.
So squash.
The best squash ever.
Comes out automatically.
So that model really works, and it works quite well. It's just very difficult going through the death phase. It's not fun to be on something, a dying empire or a dying country or a dying religion or a dying political perspective, whatever it is.
No, it's not. But at the same time, we can, this gets back to what we were talking about during the time of the Shah, where you had Sufism and the explosion of the arts and
that's right.
And the democratic and really progressive relationship with women, and then you have the Savant, right? And police brutality, and it's hard to hold those kinds of two things together. And I think that that's maybe the next step in our development, which is very difficult. And I'm not saying that. I think maybe the most obvious example would be because the Rothschilds have been, a black mark on civilization for a very long time. But they understand this. And they understood it when they had, both, was it Cromwell and was it Wellington? It was Wellington, right? It was Wellington and Napoleon, right?
Those are the foods.
Right.
They're invested in both. And the Rothschilds have done this for ages. And I'm not saying that the Rothschilds are like some spiritual model to look at, but, at the same time that people denounce the Rothschilds and proclaim them to be a pox on existence. Where do you think the money came from to build civilization? Right? It had to come from somewhere. It had to come from some place. It had to come from the credit system. And who was behind the credit system? So everything pretty much that we have around us to some degree in terms of whatever, moment or time of civilization that we're experiencing, it's kind of linked to that, for better or worse.
It's a tipping point. So there's, it's beneficial up to a point.
Right.
And then it becomes corrupt and it's probably, right. So you need checks and balances.
But to hold that view simultaneously, right? Like the institutions or the structure I'm living in, the people that borrowed the money or whatever, are also part of this kind of system and these oligarchs that in many ways we are trying to expose and make transparent, right? So it's a really interesting dichotomy. It's a really fascinating, it's kind of, and a lot of people can't, and I'm not giving the Rothschilds a pass. That's not what I'm doing. But I think for us to be, spiritually wise, we have to move off this point where there are these bad guys and clearly not great, and there are just certain things we cannot accept and won't accept, from children or desecration of the environment or whatever. But at the same time, we're part of the mix, right? We're part of it. And if we really want to have an expanded view, it gets back to that exact line that you brought up at the beginning, which is the most fair, the most foul. And I think when we get to that place, then we're at the very least, right? We begin to raise our consciousness, not even our consciousness, but our perspective up to the same place of the elites. Right? What do you think the elites think about? What do you think goes through their head in between, feasting on, 4-year-olds or whatever, right? I mean, it's a dark kind of comment, but they're thinking, we created this freaking place, right? They're thinking, the companies are ours, the oil is ours, we rule the sky. Right. These are the modern gods that you're talking about in some ways, Steve. Right. Because, they may be dark and, but in order for us to approach that level, I think we have to see it from their perspective in some ways. And again, I'm not condoning it.
No, you can
least, but in order to approach that level, we have to see it from that level. And what we've been doing, I think, and I'm part of I'm part of the process, or I've been part of the process, is theoretically, they're up here and we're down here, we're going like this, right? We're going like this. And in order for anything, I think, remotely interesting to come out of what this new birth is, we're going to have to get up here. And we're going to
like David Icke says, we have to get off our knees.
We do have to get off our knees. I would agree. And I think part of this, and look, and I can be as guilty as anybody. I think part of this is putting blame on these entities, right? Well, we've allowed the entities to do what they've done. Some of us have profited off it, some of us haven't. But at the same time, we're going to have to elevate up to that level. And to elevate up to that level, not that we're condoning anything that is dark and, creepy and, satanic or loose. This is not what I'm saying. But in order to understand the earth game, we're going to have to see it from their perspective.
We're going to have to hold a number
of a divine perspective.
Yeah.
I think we have to see from their perspective in terms of what they created here. Okay? Because for all intents and purposes, none of this shit gets built without their money and without their credit, right? I mean, in the Western hemisphere, it just doesn't get done based on the central banking system and the cheap money and all that stuff. So the schools we went to, the companies we worked for, some of which have been good, some of which have been not so good, they've had their fingertips in it, okay? So we're dwelling in their domain. And in order for us, I think, to raise up, we got to just at the very least, understand that, so that we can have a more mature discussion about, well, what kind of world do we want to create? Because if we don't want that, right, if we don't want that model, then we got to figure out how not to repeat that model if indeed it's a birth piece coming out of this.
These conversations are vital. And that's a real frustration point for me, is that conversation, real deep, thoughtful conversation, is truncated because of the political climate.
I agree.
So if you're just dying or itching to have a good conversation, and let's really just like get in there and duke it out. Let's just throw everything on the table and look at it. What are we dealing with? How can we possibly think that anything's going to change if we don't look at the rot?
Well, I think looking at the rot is important. I also think that looking at like to some degree, consent to the rot. I think that's an important piece.
Part of the package, yeah.
Our consent to the rot. Now, there's another model, right? And this is, look, when I started off doing my website back in 2009, one of the first things I jumped on was the whole like free energy package. And I thought to myself, well, if we could just figure out this free energy thing, that's a game changer. That's a leveler. And we can, turn the tide on this very quickly. And that was 2009, 2010. Now we have, Jordan Sather, amongst other people, banging the free energy drum, and, everything that goes along with some sort of disclosure around that stuff. And I think that that's, mildly interesting in some ways. But do you think that these people, if they have free energy, and I believe that they do you think they're going to give it up anytime soon?
No, and I'm not, and I'm not sure what the hoi polloi would do with it if they had it too.
What would it change?
Well, there's that theory that, that we don't have it because we would just, whatever,
squander it, right?
Make infinite number of sex robots for ourselves, or God knows what. So there's that question, because you're talking about raising up enough for these things to happen, and maybe it's an organic process. Maybe as your consciousness raise, these sort of things
begin to emerge as a result of that.
But and to your point about the perspectives, I think that's like almost like the next step to get off of the fake duality trip that everything is on. Everything's on a fake duality trip, and really it's just a matter of perspectives and context, and being able, and maybe we're being forced, especially with Trump, to hold various perspectives at the same time.
I think he's an initiator into his own unique form of mystery, right?
And to me this goes all the way back, to Aristotle, where logic became two-pointed, A or B, and neither of them are the same, whereas previous logic cannot be reconciled. Previous logics, it's A or B, A and not B, neither A nor B. Those are the Oriental mystical logics that preceded it. And so take something really basic. I think Randy Morgan seems to be, I don't know why, I guess the flat earth thing seems to come up. I don't know anything about it or the arguments for it, but from the perspective of my lived life, the earth is flat. I'm in the mountains, it's not quite flat, but basically it's my life, my purview is of a flat plane. All right, so that's one level. From the level of whatever, space, planets, people leave their bodies, people do travel astrally, they see a sphere. Okay, there's another aspect. But the mystical aspect is that my life contained here and now is completely circumscribed by the senses and the elements. Okay, and you can have more powerful senses and have other experiences beyond that, but your basic life is senses, elements, and consciousness. And the fact is that the earth is neither flat nor round from the mystical perspective. From the mystical perspective, every step you take creates the earth. The earth only exists when you step on it. As you step, each step creates the earth.
And that's the wonderful Irish saying, "May the road rise to meet your
When
feet."
the road rises up to meet you. So all those perspectives are real.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on what you're doing, you know, I need a flat earth to get to the store.
Right.
You know? I need a circular earth to get to Jupiter.
Yeah.
You know, but in the essence of my mystical experience is that the earth is just is created by each step you take, generated through you. So, you know,
with each breath.
So we're you know, so getting back also to the creation. So again, we've always talked about this. It comes from within, and to come from within, you have to have some sort of stillness and realization to see how this whole thing operates.
Yeah.
So one of the strongest experiences I ever had smoking, it was either pot or hash, and I was totally unprepared for, was to get the rushes, where every time I blinked my eyes and opened them again, everything was new again. It completely threw me off my base.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a cosmic divine truth, that is how everything actually works, that we go, the Sanskrit word is kashana. So it's a discrete unit of experience. So it's kashana by kashana by kashana, and we string them like pearls on necklace.
Right.
And so those are strung together as our lived experience. Mm-hmm. But those are discrete units of perception.
Right.
And the world is constantly being created. And getting back to where we were a few minutes ago, talking about the energy thing, Guru Ma used to say a thing in itself does not exist. So you can't just isolate one item in the field that is problematic and say, if we fix this, everything will be fine. No. Mm-hmm. You have to work on yourself internally so that your external matches your internal, so that everything is in sync. And we have to rise above. You just have to grow into being human. You're not just... Did you
say Guru Mai? Did you say Guru Mai?
No, Guru Ma.
Guru Ma.
She's a woman from Calcutta, Anjali Joseph, who set up this one-off ashram in Amityville, New York, where we, very traditional, and that's where we studied yoga, Sanskrit, Bhagavad Gita. So we had we had an extremely lucky enough to have a very traditional spiritual education there.
It was classical yoga plus Western philosophy.
Oh, sounds great.
Yeah, it was great.
It was a very unique
But a lot
education.
of insights came out of those teachings. And
interesting.
That's become our worldview.
So I was trying to search for a name in my head about the free energy thing, and the person I was trying to reference was Ben Rich, who was the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, which was the most sophisticated, off the grid R&D group, and some people believe was, kind of the ground zero for the secret space program. Mm-hmm. And on his deathbed, he claimed that not only can we go to the stars, but we're there already. That was one of his claims. He also claimed that free energy does exist, but unless the hand of God shakes it loose, you'll never get it. Right. And the third piece was that they had how they got to the stars was by resolving E = mc squared. And what I took that to be was, again, if you go into this mythology, whatever, that the craft that they had sort of found and re-engineered or back-engineered, that when you sat in the craft, you were connected into something very, very different. And that it would literally connect into your body, your central nervous system, and your mind. Mm-hmm. And if you could hold the destination in your mind that's where the craft would take you.
I've heard that.
Right.
So
That's what angels do.
Yeah.
Traditionally, that's how angels travel.
Really?
They think of a destination and they go.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's. I even going back to Catholic school, I learned that. By
The fallen angels dropped one of their wings and we picked it up.
Yeah.
Figured it out, apparently.
Not
So let's have a little moment here. Try to bring this back to center. What kind of mysteries or revelations do we have in store for us? What do you think? Like, you think QAnon is going to be revealed at some point? And who do you think QAnon is and all that stuff?
I wonder. It's, because, it doesn't feel like it's going to be around for much longer for some reason. I mean, it's been since October or something?
October 24th.
Right. You did that. Oh, that was a great show,
That was a
by the way.
great show.
By the way, that's a great show.
Actually, it's October 27th.
Anybody who hasn't seen Robert's last Sunday show on the Q chart, and I think you're doing another one, I highly recommend it. It's great stuff.
That was wonderful.
So, I guess it depends on who or what Q is and what the agenda is, and it, according to Q is going to last as long pretty much as Veterans Day, 11/11 is its projected celebration of all that it's going to do. So the thing is, the revelations of Q, 99.9% of them we knew already. There's nothing new coming out, and maybe more people get to explore. But all these things are just stuff. It's just a pile of things that happen one after another. And as we were saying before the show, I've just stopped, given up trying to hold it all in my head. Trying to be the guy who, I got everything. I got, I understand who's involved with this shooting and who's involved with, with spying on Trump and all that. And I've just reached the point where I just can't hold it in my head anymore. It's just too much for me. So my revelation in that is to kind of give up thinking that I'm the guy who knows the stuff, and just kind of
Took you to 60 to get there, huh?
Let it play out and try to, because I really.
I didn't know you thought you knew.
What's that? There are moments, and really try to just like take care of myself and my. My consciousness, my peace of mind, which has been, disturbed by much of this.
Right.
Well, I think it's an inquiry into what the devil is going on and trying to understand. So there's a delving in and tuning in to different voices and who's got this perspective, who's got that perspective, and try to clobber together some kind of a likely tale.
Right, but we know what's going on, basically.
Pretty much.
There's really no revelation necessary. As far as I think this is what the apocalypse is. Apocalypse means unveiling. Mm-hmm. I think everything's unveiled. It's not reached a tipping point of number of people where it becomes a common parlance where everybody understands it the way they understand the CNN reality that's being, dictated to them continuously.
Right.
And unfortunately, like Krys said before, it's so far apart that discussion is not possible.
Difficult. It's difficult because people get upset.
People, we've had friends, freak out because you mentioned that something about vaccines, and we've had friends. We've recently had friends apparently leave us because we didn't have nice things to say about Hillary. We didn't vote for her. We didn't vote for Trump either, but we couldn't vote for Hillary.
Right.
And apparently that friendship ended,
Or Obama.
as far as we can tell. You know?
I don't know.
It's hard to say. So people disappear.
It's just silent.
So I don't know where, I'm really not good at the future, Robert. I think
Well, it feels to me like what you're talking about is initiation through inundation. That we've been so inundated with material sources, this source, that source. And at some point, a sponge can only take so much, right? I mean, that's so much water.
It does feel a saturation point.
Yeah. So I think we're getting close to some level of saturation. That doesn't mean that there isn't work to be done, or that doesn't mean that we can't continue to refine and evolve our consciousness. But I think it has to, at this point, begin to trend into a different direction. And And that to me is the unexplored territory.
Right. Getting back to the whole thing and bringing up, the Eleusinian mysteries. I'm not, by no means am I saying we need to go back to them, because we can't anyway.
Right.
But to realize the possibility of having a culture based on that, based on a vision and a interplay between the divine and the human. To realize that as a possibility, I think, is needed. And in order to, and that's why, I'll bring it up that because I have no idea what something's coming next, but I think that's something along those lines is going to have to happen in some other form.
Well, this is really interesting. And this brings up two pieces of information that I think they may even be connected, although I've never made the connection before. But in the Congo, where they have this practice of the ibogaine rituals, right? They have various tribes in Central Africa, and some of them, like the Bwiti, have their relationship with iboga and tends to be very benevolent. Mm-hmm. And there are other groups like the Mishongo who tend to use iboga as kind of a tool for black magic. Which is interesting, because even there we see this duality. We see this plant that's incredibly powerful, and we see two kind of vested interests in using the magic of the plant, right? But the Bwiti, one of the things that they do is when you're kind of coming of age, you go through the iboga ritual, where you're literally reborn through the legs of women. These big women, they spread their legs, and it's over a little stream of water, and you're literally crawling through them, right? When that happens, apparently the member of the tribe is shown their place in the tribe, right? They're shown what they're good at. They're shown what they're capable of. They're shown a lot of really interesting pieces, and that it's almost like they get their operating manual at that point in time. Yeah. And then I used to follow like the Billy Meyer stuff a long time ago, the Pleiadian Billy Meyer stuff. It's a really interesting story. The guy Randall Winters, kind of reinterpreted the Billy Meyer material. And, there are a lot of people think Billy Meyer is a fraud and Randall Winters is a fraud, but there are some interesting things that were said during some of this stuff. And one of the things that Meyer apparently shared with Randall Winters, whether it's real or not, is fascinating. And that apparently in the Pleiades, when you reach a certain age, what happens is that they take you out of time-space for a brief period of time. And you have this cognition of eternity. And then they bring you back into time-space. And then from that point forward, you never have to question anything. You know where you come from, you know what you're a part of, and you begin to find your place in this organic whole, right? So the two things are sort of similar. And this goes back to your relationship and what you were talking about with these mysteries, the Eleusinian mysteries, and that if we had this moment in time at a certain point of our development, where we realized without any shadow of doubt what our divine nature was, and what our blueprint was, and what our operating system was, then from that point forward, we could be on it and we could contribute. And if everybody had this, it would be incredibly democratic. Nobody would feel left out. Right. We would all contribute to this wonderful thing that we could. I think that's what's missing. And if anything that's going to come next, I hope and pray we get to something like that.
And then that's what goes back to initiation and the value of it in society. And what we have now is, as Steve says, the anti-initiation.
Oh, it's terrible.
Into war and into the military service.
Well, even that now is,
into a death cult.
Even that is over with, right? We were in this other initiation now through school shootings. And, empathy or false empathy and victimization. And, it's a whole different model for a different kind of initiation. I'm not sure what it's teaching us or what's being revealed, but if most of it is built on or based on something that's not even completely factual, then it's dangerous.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Well, there are two teachers. Sorry.
And in fact, it's taking us to our anti-selves in some ways, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the anti-initiation.
Yeah,
that's right.
Go ahead.
But there are two teachers who specifically work with that lack in society. One is Martine Prechtel out in New Mexico, and the other is Malidoma Somé from Africa.
Yeah.
And those two people have recognized, what happens to a human being when they've been deprived of the initiation ritual. And then as the village and then the country and the world as a whole, that link to the divine is severed.
I think this is why ayahuasca has become so popular.
Yeah.
Because people are hungry. They're really, really hungry to, find that taste of the divine and something deep within yet beyond themselves. For better or worse, I think it's led to, the ayahuasca rush, like the gold.
Right. Right. And, the thing is that I think, I will say this about the future, that I think is probably going to have to be a little more tribal than it is now. And because it just reaches a certain point. So, when you think about, you're talking about, a lot of what you're talking about sounds also like the Native American vision quests, right? When you would go on the vision quest, would be fasting and being isolated. And it wasn't for personal knowledge, wasn't for enlightenment, but it was for your role in the tribe.
Yeah.
Depending on the animal or the deity that you encountered, you would know your role in the tribe as a heyoka, as a scout. If you saw an eagle, you might be a scout, that sort of thing. And I, so it wasn't about themselves. It wasn't about improving themselves or anything like that, but it was, it was always within the context of the tribe and even all the ancient initiations like the Mithraic initiations. They have stages which involve understanding your place within the tribe.
Yeah.
Not as a solo.
I'm sorry, cut you off, Steve. What were you going to say?
No, not as Han Solo.
Not as Han Solo.
But, the whole thing with Malidoma Somé's story that was so fascinating was, as a young child, he was actually abducted by the Catholic priest and taken to the school in the city and was raised in the school under this very strict environment. And he escaped and went through the jungles trying to find his village, and took him a while because he was totally lost, but he got back to the village and was living there. And then at a certain point, the elders came to him and said, "It's not working. You're going to have to go through initiation, because the way you've been trained in the Catholic school is antithetical to the village life. And unless you agree to go through the initiation now, just your presence, you could just be sitting on a rock, but your presence in this village is disturbing because of the way you were trained. So you either leave and go back to the city and live as a city person, or you go through the initiation now as an older person." And he chose to go through the initiation.
I think he was 19, which is kind of old.
It was old.
Right, 14 and 15 is usual age for them.
But he chose to go through the initiation so he could incorporate back into the village.
Interesting.
And they're dangerous. People die sometimes.
Oh, the initiations are life-threatening.
They're real.
Yeah.
You know, they're real.
Mm-hmm.
What was the name of his book? Something about water and the sacred, something. But
something in water.
Highly recommend the book. It was riveting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think we do have an initiation. Unfortunately, it happens for men when we're about 3 days old. It's called a circumcision.
I know you can make me go fetal here, but yeah.
So it's really.
I'm really glad you've been bringing that up, and I'm looking forward to your next talk on it.
Well, there's a lot to unpack around it, and I think a lot of it has to do with Chiron and Aries,
mm-hmm.
and the wounded male, and how men get wounded from the jump. 3 days in, right?
Mm.
Trauma, blood, heavy stuff, heavy stuff.
Yeah, well, certainly ancient Greeks thought it was not a good practice.
So listen, we're going to get on out of here, but before we do, I have to say this. Before we do. This gets into this piece around initiation in youth. Yesterday, I did a reading for a 16-year-old young woman in San Francisco, and Petaluma. And I looked at her chart, and her chart screamed nursing all over this chart. Arts and nursing. And I said, well, if I were you, I would get into nursing, because you've got nursing all over you. I said, oh my God, I'm going to apply to I'm going to nursing school next year in another state. I'm like, good, you nailed that. And I know it sounds Pollyanna, but I really feel like astrology could be really good for young people, like around 15 or 16. Mm-hmm. And to just wrap their heads around what they would be good at, right?
Like a guidance counselor.
Right, because we took those horrible tests in school that were supposed to tell you what you're going to be good at. I don't know if you remember. I can't remember.
What were you good at? What were you good at?
Oh gosh, I can't remember. I was
aptitude tests. Is that
yeah, I was really good in math back then. So it was.
But they gave you like career choices, right?
Yeah, you would take the test. They ask you a whole bunch of stupid questions, and then they would tell you what a good career would be. So at the time, I was really good in math, and not great in English. I was okay in English, but somehow I flipped once I got to college. So it would have been something like that. I was I got whatever I got, like I forget, it was something really high on my math SATs. I only missed like one question or two or something like that.
So my career choices came out as I think journalist might have been near the top. Journalist, lawyer, some form of scientist, and police officer. Those were my top choices.
Right. Not what would come out from reading a chart, though.
I don't know, man. My chart is an interesting chart. Probably should have been a doctor. Hey, let's get out of here. And it's been great. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom of the Eleusinian mysteries. And I wish I could play Orpheus by David Sylvian without getting tagged by YouTube. It would be a great send out here.
Could we sing it?
Go on ahead.
I love you, Steve, but not that much.
Yeah, no, okay.
So, hey, happy 60th birthday to you.
Thank you, my friend.
And
appreciate it.
We'll catch up with you next month, okay?
We'll see you in another month, Robert. Thanks again. Always good.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.